Did you get one?
Welcome to the April 23rd BC LaRouche chapter meeting here in Vancouver. Tonight, our topic is, how do you take down the British Empire? That's our topic tonight. Okay. Kennedy was threatening the empire. You saw what happened to him. The entities that were involved in taking out Kennedy and beginning the process of reorientating the United States towards a support role for the empire, involved a lot of the entities that are currently controlling U.S. policy and U.S. government. Now, Lyndon LaRouche emerges in the late 1970s as an organizer for a comprehensive shift away from the U.S. support for the British Empire and the group that he was organizing or was organizing on behalf of or with intended to come in with the Reagan administration in 1981. And Ronald Reagan was shot not long after his inauguration, and he was incapacitated to such a degree that he could not consolidate, or those people could not consolidate control over the policy, and the George Herbert Walker Bush crowd, the Bush family crowd, was able to neutralize and consolidate a lot more to the effect of essentially negating the efforts of those who were going to be running the country under Reagan, who were collaborating with and were using LaRouche as the international coordinator and organizing for bringing a lot of people in. Now the key to understanding is that in the late 70s, you still had a regulated banking system in the United States. You still had a regulated banking system, but you at the same time, in 78, you had the takeoff of the shadow banking system coming in to strip the U.S. economy. So that was on the economic front. And a large part of the funds that were going offshore were funds that were connected to criminal activity like the drug trade. And so this is the empire coming back, not just to kill, but to actually possess economically. At the same time, you have the promotion of global free trade policies, which in turn were meant to dismantle the advanced sector nations and replace their production with very cheap slave labor type situations. So that was all going on in the 70s, at the late 70s. And the team that LaRouche was coming in, they were going to wage a war on the drugs. They were going to work out a deal with the Soviet Union to jointly develop the technologies to knock out missiles. Indira Gandhi was involved in the discussions with LaRouche as part of this. And she was assassinated not long after Reagan's inauguration. And the other person who was involved with LaRouche in discussions around this was the president of Mexico, Lopez Portillo. So, the net effect of this was that The Soviets rejected the cooperation with the US because the British had massively penetrated the networks that came to power after Chernenko died under Andropov. And so essentially you had a situation where by 1988, when Reagan term was up, you had LaRouche on his way to prison, you had George Bush on his way into the White House, and you had essentially a mess. And you had the Soviet Union breaking up because, for many reasons related to this, and you had a situation where it was a very dire situation, and under George Herbert Walker Bush, this empire took over, looted Russia, and then Clinton came in, and Clinton came in because of the break in the establishment that allowed him to come in. They used Ross Perot, and Clinton came in, and Clinton, the people who went to Clinton from the institution said, you got to get LaRouche out of prison because he's needed to be organizing to mitigate and go against the policies that were under Bush, especially because of the respect that LaRouche has in the Third World and in Russia. So in the early 90s, you have another effort trying to create itself under Clinton to break from the directionality that the British had set for the United States with the help of their internal operations and their external operations. And Clinton came under massive attack. The guy who ran the attack was Ambrose Evans Pritchard, who was a journalist who was based in Washington. He's now based in London. And he organized a massive assault on Clinton. And a lot of things happened. And this possibility that existed under Clinton as president never materialized. He never got out from under all the operations that were being run and all the games that were being run. And a lot of the operations were being run through Al Gore. A lot of the operations were being Al Gore. So we were involved, LaRouche was involved in policy discussions with the Clinton administration, but his principal opponents inside the Clinton administration primarily were Al Gore, and secondarily was Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton did not share LaRouche's views per se, to the degree that Clinton, to a large degree, had some of LaRouche's views, because Clinton knew who the British were. He understood the British Empire. He understood what it was, but he could never get out from under the operations that they were running. And we were trying to set up a meeting at a very crucial point to have a situation where the Prime Minister of Russia, Primakov, would actually sit down with Clinton, either in Washington or in Kuala Lumpur at the APEC summit, to actually have a dialogue such that they could start to coordinate policy. And that didn't come off because either something came up and Clinton couldn't leave for Kuala Lumpur, or Primakov's plane was forced to go back because of the U.S. was starting to bomb and so forth in Yugoslavia. But anyhow, that's going off the track. So then we have the Bushes. There's a failure. You have the Bush crowd and 9/11. Okay. Now, LaRouche warned about 9/11 in January of 2001. He said a Reichstag fire is coming. They cannot run the operations they intend to run without crisis management structures. So then 9/11 comes. Okay, and then everything follows from that. Now, so on the John Stockwell show, on the day, as 9/11 was happening, LaRouche was saying that this could not have been done without support from within the U.S. government. He said that publicly. And then, eventually there were investigations into 9/11, and one of the principal people on the committee, Bob Graham, and they had a staff, and the staff was investigating, and the staff got massive blockage from the FBI. Nonetheless, two of the staffers managed to get enough hard evidence on the Saudis to put 28 pages in the 9/11 Commission report, and then what happened was it got suppressed. And so Bob Graham then wrote a novel, Keys to the Kingdom, which basically revealed what was in the 9/11 in the novel, and started to work to keep it going. Okay, and then we teamed up with him because we were already teamed up with all the people that were key people in the Kennedy investigation of the Kennedy assassination. People like William Garrison and Fletcher Prouty, those kind of people. We were actually working on cross-checking all of their facts and stuff like that, so that they wouldn't say something that would be stupid or something like that. And so we were working with those people. So then, so you had the Bush, and then you had Obama, but this 9/11, we kept this 9/11 thing going. And then you had the victims from New York who knew all about this, launched their lawsuit against the Saudi government, and that's been going on ever since as well. And they have not given up. This thing has been kept on simmering. And then a few years ago, we got a couple congressmen who were willing to fight, Walter Jones and a few others, and we were basically doing a lot of the legwork, organizing for this, and Bob Graham, and we've been having press conferences, and we've been regularly putting out. But before 9/11, in the year 2000, we issued a formal complaint to the State Department with all the evidence that the United Kingdom should be declared a state terrorist sponsoring state. And this is because the two major terrorist organizations that were very active, one was killing tourists in Egypt, and the other was killing was about to destroy Russia, the Chechens. They were all being run out of London. Now, so we were already mobilizing because we saw this thing becoming a major thing in the world, this international terrorist apparatus. We saw it emerging as a major in the 90s, and we were going after it. And LaRouche in 1999 did a video on it that was 3 hours long and called Storm Over Asia, where we said that the British were going to unleash this kind of terrorism in the belly of Russia, the southern belly of Russia, and the Middle East, and so forth. And that the question would be, in the coming period of the economic crisis and the collapse, would those countries survive in such a manner that we could emerge with a world of, a world where these countries go together? Because at that time, in 1998, LaRouche had been proposing that the four major nations, United States, Russia, China, and India, bypass the British and start working together for the common aims of humanity. And Primakov picked that up in '98 when he became, after the GKO collapse, after the financial collapse, and he became the prime minister, and he promoted that. And what began to emerge was a beginning of what's called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which was the beginning of setting up a structure between initially Russia and China and some of these Southwest Central Asian nations on dealing with this problem that we foresaw coming. And so this is all, now this is, mind you, this was before 9/11. So there was already discussion. Now when Putin became prime minister and then president, he pledged to take out the Chechen issue. Madeleine Albright and the British were saying you got to negotiate with the Chechens or whatever. Russia was economically prostate. They'd had one Chechen war which ended in a stalemate, and Putin took out the Chechens. And the way he did it was he went to the people of Chechnya and organized an anti-Chechen capability, which came to power and was able to represent the people of Chechnya for Chechens. In other words, he didn't do we're going to occupy you kind of thing. It was he found those people who didn't like Saudi-backed terrorism, who didn't like organized crime, who didn't like the stuff, and they became. And so that's a model for Syria, later on for Syria. You don't go in and invade. You go in and you find the institutions that are actually willing, that actually have a commitment to development and to peace, and you work with those institutions to prop them up and help them out, and so that they can effectively fight, so that the people of that area can say, okay, we got a team that's willing to fight this, so we're willing to fight. We don't have to live under terror. So that's kind of the situation that existed before 9/11. Once 9/11 occurs, the population of the United States goes through this phase. One phase is the terror, and then the next phase is the failure to come up with the weapons of mass destruction. And there was a whole battle inside the government over that, because the Cheney crowd was determined to go all the way, and they were stymied in an internal fight, which we were directly involved in. We got out millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of pieces of propaganda attacking Cheney, exposing 90. We just went all out in the U.S. I mean, we had a massive presence on the streets, and so we cracked this thing. And so by the second term, Bush was the neocons did not have control of the Bush administration in the second term. It was, but now we're coming to the next election, and so the British are afraid that Hillary, under the influence of her husband, would, as they would under Kerry, if Kerry had come in 2004 or 2005, and then so they did everything possible to prevent Hillary from getting the nomination and bring in Obama. And Obama was a British agent. He was British all the way. There's no ambiguity there. But his handlers like Valerie Jarrett and the people around Tony Blair and the people that essentially run his operation, they use very sophisticated Tavistokian techniques. Rather than appeal to the neocons, they use very sophisticated, where you never know where he really stands, you never know where he really is. Everything's, and then they launch behind the scenes a wave of terror and assassinations and things like that. So it's kind of got that quality, that really British quality, that you don't know where anything is, you don't know where anything stands, that kind of thing. So we went to war once it became clear that that was where things were going, we went to war against Obama. But the important thing is we never gave up on the 28 pages. And so, now, I gotta go through the issue of the Saudis, because the Saudis have been under British control for 2 centuries, that whole region. The Saudi royal family and the British royal family have essentially become completely collaborative, okay? The Saudis were built up by the British, and their oil empire is run by the British directly. BP and Royal Dutch Shell, Aramco is run by the British. And then a deal was made in 1995 involving Prince Bandar and Margaret Thatcher, which is a very important deal. This was the deal which set up, in 1985, a oil for weapons deal, but as a cover for a much greater amount of oil that was being given, which was being sold on the open market, and it was going into a slush fund to run irregular warfare operations. And it's estimated that by 2007, there was something like $100 billion of this money went into covert operations. And I'll explain why this is so important. So you have not only covert operations, like the terrorist apparatus being run inside Russia, but also all over the world. All these operations are being run with this kind of money. And it's also integrated with the drug trade. So what happens is that this is the enforcement arm of the empire. Well, most people think of the U.S. military as the enforcement arm of the empire. But the real enforcement arm of the empire is this international terrorism, which also sets up the pretext for sending U.S. military, for establishing U.S. military bases, for establishing military operations, what have you. But the military operations are never successful. But they do create a climate of recruitment for people. But that's not enough. The actual funds are there. Without the money, they couldn't do it. And then you have 9/11. Do they go after the people who did 9/11? No, because the people who ran 9/11 were in the government. So who do they go after? They go after the Iraqi, Saddam Hussein. They go after the Taliban, who was not involved in 9/11. They went after Al-Qaeda. Well, yeah, they went after Al-Qaeda. Yeah, they probably weren't involved in 9/11. They went after Iran. They weren't involved in 9/11. They went after Hezbollah. They were not involved in 9/11. You know, so who was involved? Well, who were the hijackers? They were mostly Saudis. Right. So this is percolating. Right. It's percolating. So, and we've been going around to Congress every year or so with a massive campaign, the 28 pages, the 28 pages, the 28 pages. And more congressmen have started to privately read the pages, getting authorization to come in and read the pages. So we now have up to over 100 congressmen who now have read the 28 pages. Now, this little hook, the 28 pages, right, completely changes people's interpretation of the 20-year history prior, or the 10-year history prior to 9/11, or the 25-year history since today. 2 decades of history. You have a completely changed perception of history. Now, why are people having trouble with Glass-Steagall? Why are people having trouble in other countries doing what's in the interest of their nation? Because they're scared. That's why. They're scared of this assassinations, corruption scandals, every kind of operation that's run through this kind of non-governmental, operation. But China has moved ahead, and Russia is moving ahead as well, and India is moving ahead, and their economic powers are moving forward. And Russia successfully defeated the terrorist threat internally, and they're getting ready to successfully defeat the next terrorist threat, which is now going to be unleashed in areas in the Central Asian part of Russia, bordering on Russia. The Taliban the ISIS is being now transported into northern Pakistan, into northern Afghanistan, into northern Afghanistan, so that it can go into Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. So they're actually moving that whole thing, going in that direction. So that's where the Russians are really concerned. That's where they are preparing. That's where they think that this whole thing is vectored into that region. And that had a lot to do with why they did what they did in Syria, because ISIS and al-Nusra were close to taking power. So their action in Syria and the way they did it further opened the door, because it demonstrated that this power was not all powerful. Okay, and those forces in the West that are terrified saw some capability there. And then, of course, the Russians have been organizing American institutions and European institutions. The Russians have been very careful not to go into a confrontation with European nations and with the U.S., but they've been doing a lot of diplomacy, but also a lot of contact with institutions, saying, look, let's take care of this problem. Let's not worry about all this other stuff. Let's take care of this problem. Let's work together. So they've been doing a lot more diplomacy and a lot more networking, as the Chinese have been doing, than they have military. So it's very important to know this, that the Russians are primarily doing diplomatic activity, not military activity, in support of their operations. So this Al-Yamama deal in '85 was the cornerstone of the emergence of this British-directed terror capability.
That's between Thatcher and Bandar?
Huh?
That was between Thatcher and Bandar?
Bandar. Now Bandar goes on, he was the military attaché at the time. Then he goes on to become the ambassador and member of the Bush family. And then he is mentioned in the 9/11 report as having his wife provided the money for the hijackers in the 28 pages. He's mentioned in the 28 pages. Yeah. So
how is he involved? How is he a Bush member, a family member?
well, when he became a regular guest at the Bush family residence, he was considered almost part of the Bush family.
Oh, okay.
Bandar Bush was his name.
They called him Bandar Bush.
Really? I didn't know that.
So you have this enforcement arm, and if you're going to do anything positive, you gotta take on that enforcement arm. You can't move unless you take on the enforcement arm, and that's what the beginning process going on with the beginning of the call for the release of the 28 pages. Once people start to see what the 28 pages really say, then the ball is rolling. Why? Who covered it up? Who suppressed? Now, Bob Graham is giving interviews now. He's not saying that there was a cover-up. He's using a different term. He's using a different term, and the term he's using is willful deception and suppression. Willful deception and suppression, because there's a whole trove of other information that they're suppressing, involving Los Angeles, involving Sarasota, Florida, involving all kinds of 18, operatives, there's a list of 18 operatives that were involved, that they suppressed, that worked directly with the Saudi government, and on and on. There's a lot. The 28 pages is only the tip of the iceberg. So that's a very important aspect of this. Okay? So, now, before I get into the particulars, I just want to understand the British, okay? The British began a movement in the late 1800s, going into the early 1900s, which was a world imperial system based on racist eugenics. And by the 1920s, a large part of the American population and an even larger part of the academic world were eugenics, race science. And if you lived in America in the 1920s, you heard about the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves, but you had the most incredible racial apartheid system in the United States that was, in part, connected to the fact that there had been a shift in the mindset of the U.S. population. That same empire was being promoted and Adolf Hitler was being cultivated. And he was cultivated by the British directly, with the help of Wall Street. And he comes to power by their support. And then he begins the process of implementing a preparation for war with the Soviet Union and what he believes is an empire. And Hitler's job was to wipe out Hitler's job was to wipe out the Soviet Union. Okay, that was his job. But because there were elements in France which went over to Hitler, Hitler was able to come into France, where there's a fifth column. So that changed the geometry. And that means the British would have to make a deal with Hitler and be a partner with Hitler, but with Hitler having the upper hand. And that was not something the British had intended, so they brought in the United States. And as soon as the war looked like it was all going to be over, they went after FDR. And they brought in, Henry Jackson didn't make, was chosen by Roosevelt to succeed him, and he didn't get a chance. Henry Wallace, I'm sorry. Henry Wallace could not succeed Roosevelt. So now I'm using the Hitler example because the Saudi example has similarities. But because you're living in a nuclear world, you can't run a kind of war with Hitler. You have to use irregular forces. So essentially, the same principle is involved. The Saudis become the promoters through the ideology of the Wahhabi ideology, which the British may have shaped in the late 1700s. There's a lot of evidence that the British actually shaped this ideology as a tool, as a future tool. Now, what this ideology does is it promotes this idea of an Islamic world state, an extreme version of Islam, right? And so it's developed as an irregular warfare tool with suicide, with a key component being suicide, and it gets to establish itself to some degree in Afghanistan, but also the Chechen wars, the veterans, the Chechens who made it out of Chechnya, became the actual cornerstone of the military developments of Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra and ISIS. The Chechen veterans play a very key role in this. But this is an army. This is war, but it's to be conducted as terrorism. They demonstrated their capabilities in the Mumbai incident in India. They've been testing it, working it. You know, and then finally, you have a split off from Al-Qaeda, puts forward the Caliph concept, and that becomes ISIS, you know, the Caliph idea. And now, all the people they're brainwashing and funding and financing are now, you know, going to submit to the Caliph and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So all this is being done by the British with the Saudis. And then Putin goes in, the Russians go into Syria and stop it from taking over. And then that shakes everything up because the momentum, this thing works on momentum. It works on momentum. You know, it's invincible. It can't be stopped. You know, that kind of thing. And Putin stopped it, at least in part. So that changes the whole geometry. Meanwhile, the effect of the refugees and everything else like that is further destabilizing Europe, and it's destabilizing the United States. So you can imagine what would be the process that would now begin on top of what Putin has done in Syria if you now have the 28 pages come out. And you have the Saudis threatening to dump all their treasury bonds. What does this do? This is big. So, but this concept of the British of using irregular warfare against all the countries of the world to break them down, so they cannot oppose, they cannot defend themselves against the bankers, they cannot defend themselves against the Greens, against whatever. This whole process is so if you're going to defend your country at this point, you got to take this apparatus down. And my sense is that the 28-page the 28-page thing, if it keeps building and breaks through and they put it out, then you have a process that's going on. It's going to badly damage the functions of the terror apparatus, which is not just Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra or ISIS, but it's organized crime. It's assassination squads. It's the power to bring down any elected official in any part of the world. It's behind the scenes. It's all this stuff. It starts to crack. You start to crack it, and now you have a situation. If that starts to happen, you have a situation where people in Congress, I mean, in the U.S. Congress, I mean, we go to these people. And we say, you got to go with Glass-Steagall, you got to do this, and they go, well, I'm scared. We're scared. We're scared to go all the way. Like a congressman could legally read the 28 pages on the congressional floor, the way Mike Gravel did with the Pentagon Papers. And he's working with us right now. He's actually touring, doing a lot of tours with us. And none of them are too scared to do that. They're scared. John Kerry was going to destroy Vice President Bush on the Contra thing, and he got a phone call from Dick Cheney, and he got scared. He had every reason to be scared. You know, he got scared. So this apparatus, you crack this apparatus, and then you might break the dam open, where people are not so terrified. Politicians are not so terrified. But then you have the population. Now, Obama, what's going to happen to him in this thing? He has to defend the British Empire. He has to defend the Saudis. Because he is an agent of the British Empire. That's what he's there for. And he says he's going to veto the bill called the JASTA bill, which is the Justice, what's the JASTA bill? Hold on. I'm having trouble. Anyhow, it's justice against state terrorists. It's justice against state.
So the bill is gonna take off the immunity.
Yeah, it's justice against state terrorist act, against state terrorism act. Okay, against. So this is to allow for the $1 trillion civil suit to go forward in the U.S. courts. You know, so this is really big, and so meanwhile, China's coming on very big. They're going to be putting $6 billion into Nigeria. They're working to put in the railway system in Latin America. They're now going to pick up a Russian program and do their own version of floating nuclear power plants, and they're going to start that very soon. They're going to get it done very soon, you know, and they're going to start. You know, they're really moving. They're really moving, and you know, they're on a different scale. They're coming into the U.S. and to Detroit. We're going to set up auto factories. We're going to help you guys out. You know, so they're gaining all the support all over the world for economic activity. And they're trying to you know, to do all this economic activity. And there's many other examples. I mean, they're doing this on a global scale. So you have that going on at the same time. And then you have, most of all, the financial system. It is not functional at this point. So, and the empire cannot count on the financial system giving them the power anymore. And you had the Panama Papers, where they tried to expose the people they wanted to expose, but they ended up exposing the whole thing. The whole system is based on these tax havens, which are the center of the financial empire. The center of the financial empire, connected into London, is the tax havens. And I said last time that the net investment coming out of the tax havens into London, into Britain, is about a net of $1 trillion a year. So this is huge. This is how the system works. Now governments can shut those tax havens down. They can demand. They can do all of that. I mean, and that's all implied in Glass-Steagall. That's all implied in Glass-Steagall because you're essentially separating the banking from the investment. So you have all of this going on. So they're very shaky right now. And so Obama goes to Saudi Arabia, and his chief person, Josh Earnest, I like his last name, Josh Earnest, says that they did not, Obama did not bring up the 28 pages or the JASTA, and then he goes and meets with the Queen on her birthday, and now.
Who, Obama?
Yeah, Obama.
How old is she now?
90. She turned 90.
Okay.
Now, this is really something. At the press conference, 2 hours with Cameron, where he was pumping to keep Britain in the EU, he shared an anecdote with the reporters that he had a staff person who normally stays in the hotel, but she wanted very much to meet the Queen. And so Obama got special permission for her to come and be in the receiving line, you know, for the Queen. And that staff person met the Queen and almost fainted. That's just a direct quote. And that's the special relationship. Nothing is going to impact that. That is solid. That will continue. This is Obama speaking. Hopefully, eternally. It's a special relationship with the British. That's now. He also had under his name an op-ed in the London Telegraph, Daily Telegraph, and I'll read you an extended quote. As citizens of the United Kingdom take stock in their relationship with the European Union, you should be proud that the European Union has helped spread British values and practices. Democracy, the rule of law, open markets, across the continent and to its periphery. The European Union doesn't moderate British influence, it magnifies it. A strong Europe is not a threat to Britain's global leadership. It enhances Britain's global leadership. The United States sees how your powerful voice in Europe ensures that Europe takes a strong stance in the world and keep the EU open, outward looking, and closely linked to its allies on the other side of the Atlantic. So the US and the world need your outsized influence in the world to continue, including within Europe. What can I say? Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty. He sees. So Obama personally sees the British Empire as the model, as the method, as the system, and that the system that he's leading in the U.S. is part of that system. So this is pretty. Now I don't know how this is going to go over in the United States when people see this, but maybe some of them are too far gone to understand what this means. But anyhow.
Or in Europe. Or in Europe.
Or in Europe, yeah.
Because they're gonna be.
Yeah, they're gonna be, yeah. So now. So this 28 pages thing is something that we've been working on, other people have been working on, and we've been working with the other people that have been working on it. So it's not just one it's not just one group. Jeff Steinberg, our LaRouche's chief, our chief of intelligence for the LaRouche movement, Jeff Steinberg. He's been in touch with these people. He's been continuously in touch for perhaps as much as a decade with all of the principals, the victims of 9/11, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot more. There was a release of a document from something called the okay. So it's Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. Okay, and so there's this interagency on declassification, which declassified the draft document of the investigators for the 9/11 Commission. That just opens the door. That they were pursuing the Saudi angle, and they were blocked at every turn by the FBI. So this document has now been released, and we're now getting it out. So this thing is not over. So now, So this has the potential of not only going after the Saudis, but it has the potential internally for going after the Bushes, Obama, and the FBI. This has the potential of weakening the FBI operations inside the United States, which you have to do if you're going to have the capacity to deal for a political process to emerge in the United States, or even a non-political process behind the scenes to emerge in the United States that can deal effectively with the financial collapse with the measures that are required. Otherwise, you don't have a way, you don't have the political process involved. So this is also key, because what we're on the verge of is war. And the fundamental issue behind the war, behind the fact that Obama is being very provocative with the Chinese and they're being very provocative with the Russians, and the Chinese are being very firm and the Russians are being very firm, because the Russians and the Chinese cannot be not firm, because otherwise it's an encouragement to go further. Is what China's doing in a decade or so in 2 decades, it will transform the world economy. And that transformation is not a world that these people want to live in. It's not a world that the monarchy wants to live in, that the oligarchy wants to live in. It's just not a world that they want to live in. So that's the driving force for war right there. It's not what Russia's doing. It's not what they're doing to Russia is related to that. What they're doing in the Middle East is related to that. What they're doing all over the world is related to that. That's what it's related to.
So when you say war, are you talking about war directly with China?
We're talking about preemptive nuclear war, because that's the only way they could do it. That's what we're looking at, preemptive nuclear war. And China would be the primary, but Russia would have to be included. If they could get Russia to back down and let them go after China, but Russia won't do that. So that's the game that's being played. And you have these nutcases, talking about war with Russia, but they really mean war with China.
Wow.
And but it's hard to organize a war against China, because the Chinese are very unwarlike, unless you're stepping on their toe. They're very unwarlike. They're not a war. They've never been a war-oriented country, historic, culturally. They rather do business. They'd rather be doing business than having to go to war, because they've been through so much in China. I mean, and Russia too. Russia and China have both been through so much in the last 2 centuries. It's inconceivable to any American, or for that matter Canadian, just what these people have gone through, the people of these parts of the world have gone through. So I'm going to open it up for discussion, questions, whatever people want to raise.
So when you say, how are they gonna justify it?
Yeah. This is very complicated. It's very, very complicated. Because the U.S. has been trying to develop the means to win a nuclear war. And the Russians and the Chinese have been figuring out that that's what the United States is trying to do. So the Russians and the Chinese have been trying to figure out ways by which they can prevent the United States from winning a nuclear war, from NATO from winning a nuclear war. So it's very complicated. Do you really know what the Russians and the Chinese have up their sleeve? And then the Russians display that they've been preparing for this, and the Chinese.
It's not prevent to win the nuclear war. It's prevent the nuclear war.
It's to prevent
because
the
you cannot win. So
Right.
the technology is there in order not to United States can consider consequences of going into nuclear.
Right. It's a deterrence. Yeah.
Not to win.
It's not to win. It's is to deter a nuclear war by saying you can't win a nuclear war. You can't win a nuclear war. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. But so so this has been going on.
So if that's the case, during early mid-90s, when Soviet just broke down, they had, United States was like a sole superpower, you would say. Why did they hold on to that time? Or they thought they had everything under control then, during that time?
Okay. That's a very good question. Okay. Fortunately for Russia, despite the depredations of the international bankers and the policies that brought Russia economically down, literally, genocide. Fortunately for Russia, 8 of those years till Putin came in, or 7 of those years till Putin came in, or 8, were under Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton personally was not in favor of conquering or wiping Russia out or doing what the British might have wanted to do. And by the time Bush is in there, Putin is in there. And Putin immediately realized that George Bush was the kind of guy that he could palsy-walsy with. Because Bush was not that bright, and
Still isn't.
and Putin was a very compassionate person.
Are you talking about George W.?
Yeah, and he could understand that that Bush was, needed some affection, and he was very, he was very, Putin is a very, very personable person, and he's not arrogant in any way. So he struck up a friendship with and I'm sure that was not appreciated, but he was able to sustain a friendship with George Bush. Meanwhile, they were running terror operations against Russia, so they would contact George Bush and say, what are you doing? He says, oh, are we doing that? Well, I got to get on it.
So you played him somehow.
Yes, he was able to play Bush. Now that, but see, and then Russia, you got to give credit to Russia's diplomatic corps. Primakov was foreign minister for a while, and then the people who have been in Russia's, they've been very careful. They played a very interesting game of not challenging the United States. And I could be corrected for what I'm going to say, but this is my personal view, that Putin played the Medvedev card very well, creating the impression that they had a shot at taking over through
Medvedev.
Yeah. And so that was a very cute little game that he played to keep them from thinking that he was going to go hardcore.
So Medvedev,
Medvedev, yeah.
was he a politician that was running against Putin?
No.
He's his body, but he was a president of Russia for like 4 years, because you can run two terms for 4 years, 8 years, and after you have to step down and after come back again.
Right. but then Putin joined up with him, didn't he?
Right, the way I saw it was that Putin played a game with the West, that, you know, keeping the door open for them to come in and take over, to buy time. Giving them the appearance that they had that option. This is my view.
So they won't go nuclear.
Because, yeah, exactly. So they wouldn't go nuclear, so that he could buy time. Because in that time, the Russians have restructured their military. They've restructured all of their defenses in such a way that it's more modern than it was. It's more modern. I don't mean in terms of nuclear weapons, but I mean in terms of their command structure, their integration.
Right, so what you're saying is that Putin did that so that the Russians would have more time to, again, organize themselves and become a force to be reckoned with.
Yes, exactly.
And he is still playing this game.
Huh?
He is still playing.
He's still playing the game because he's not cracking down on the oligarchs. He's still playing the game.
You mean within Russia?
Yeah, because he could actually be much more beneficial for the people of Russia if he just set up a national bank instead of the central bank that they have, and just if he did what Glaziev recommended, Russia would take off a lot quicker. But he's still playing the game. Hey, like you said, he's still playing the game. And
Because there's still a threat, because of the threat that's still.
Because Russia is not ready yet.
Not ready yet.
Because in the 90s it was destroyed completely. So you have to rebuild the whole power. No any other country does that in such a short time.
Yeah.
In the 90s, actually, America had Russia under control because with Yeltsin, there was so many CIA agents who were advisors. So Russia was prepared through oligarchs to give all resources to American companies.
Yeah.
they did.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah.
And that's where all oligarchs came up. So
Through Soros.
yeah.
But the population got very angry.
Well, it was genocide. Like
Yeah,
with
the population got very angry, and then that led to the rise of Primakov and Lushkov.
So,
Not Lushkov, but Primakov.
I think I don't know where Putin came out. So if Putin wouldn't be there as a personality, as a person there, I don't know how Russia would probably collapse in too many countries. You know, it just wouldn't exist because it was very harsh. It was like, you know, that like we're talking about British, they were getting to Russia for centuries. That's what they want to do. It's 19th revolution and through Second World War and stuff like that. So that was big win for all this oligarchy structure of Western, right, of American and British. But Putin somehow didn't show himself like as against of that system, but he still was able to hide a lot of things and work things out. Like if you remember, there was a submarine Kursk, right?
Yeah.
That where the war would started because submarine Kursk was attacked by American submarine, and lots of people. It's a military ship that was completely destroyed. So the nuclear war.
Is that what sank the Kursk?
Yeah.
So the Kursk didn't have an internal problem?
No, it didn't. So it was targeted, but officially in all newspapers it was like Kursk. It just had the accident. He actually had to let people die inside the Kursk, not to start the Third World War. Because if he would admit that it was attacked by American submarine, then you don't have choice. You just have to go with it. And so there is lots of things going on.
Wow.
Putin was like, he is like really good player. He's like a chess master, you know. He remembers things, but he just goes ahead.
Okay, this is a little off topic, and I don't want to spend a lot of time or waste any of your time. And I haven't been here for a long time, so maybe you said something about it, but what is your take on the 2 Malaysian airplanes that have been shot down? Is there any kind of smoking gun?
The first Malaysian airplane, it appears there are a lot of different reasons, but it appears from what our sources tell us is that this was designed to be a new 9/11, that the plane was going to come back somewhere and nail something. And I don't know what happened. There's also evidence that the pilot was under the influence of radical Islam and stuff like that. But it's not clear. It's not clear. Now, the plane that the Malaysian airliner has a very similar signature to the presidential plane of Putin. So there's a lot of speculation because President Putin's plane came across that same area about the same time. It's about the same period of time. That the Malaysian plane was mistaken for Putin's plane. There's that. That's one hypothesis.
Yeah, one version.
Huh?
One version.
Yeah.
I haven't heard.
I never heard that either.
Huh?
I never heard that either.
And then the other version, well, it appears that it was by the behavior of the people investigating. Like you haven't heard any more charges against Russia. That it probably was shot down by the Ukrainian.
Military.
And it was blamed on Russia. But I suspected that but I don't know. Do you have any more information?
Well, that was, yeah, so if it would be any evidence of rebels or Ukrainian rebels or Russian military shooting the plane, then it will be all in newspapers because it was on the first pages that, it's Putin's fault and all of that in the beginning, right? But now, like you said, it's silent. And it means that the evidence is against that version that Russia did it or rebels did it. The rebels didn't have neither planes capable of shutting it down, neither anti-missile or like missiles that can do that. So.
Okay. So.
But interesting fact about those two Malaysian planes because they are similar. The one that disappeared and the one that was shut down in Ukraine. So there are different versions. What could happen there.
So it's not clear.
What was the signature of the plane you said?
Well, it looks the same. It has the same paint markings.
And it has visuals because the same colors.
The same colors.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The Dutch report found that the Ukrainian military, they published apparently, was the only military that had the Buk missile that shot it down. There was there's no Russian military.
Because Russian did not use that type of missiles anymore, but they assume it was shut down. They gave a specific type of missile in Russia. They don't have it in military. It's already advanced to a next
Technology.
level.
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Paul, when do you see these 28 pages coming out? So I'd like to read them. I mean,
Okay.
when is this
Okay.
going to become common
Um,
knowledge?
If they come out,
If
they come out, they haven't come out yet. But if they come out, it's going to be devastating.
I know, that's why I'd like to have
If they don't come out, I'm recommending a congressman on their own take the courage to read them out loud, etc. But it's a trap because we all know what's in the 28 pages. It's just that the American people, if they actually read it, it's a verification of what we already know.
Yes.
But we already know what's in it. And everybody and the 100 plus congressmen who've read it also know what's in it. So it's not like nobody knows what's in it. It's a question of whether you actually say it. Now, when you say that, when you put it out, then, well, what the hell has this last 15 years been? And then that's when people, it's like 100 times there were no weapons of mass destruction. And so if you think the credibility of the power structure today is anything, you're gonna see the credibility of the power structure, you know,
Disappear.
disappear.
Now, against that backdrop, you've got an awful lot of discontent and
Yes.
unrest down in the States. That could be like throwing gasoline on the fire.
Yes, of course.
And you could have then internal revolution, dissent, armed conflict against the power structure.
No, because
Why
it's,
not?
because it's the split in the power structure that's causing it. In other words, this is me speaking now. There is a split taking place in the power structure. Because the empire is going down.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to nuclear war or not? Do you want to have Glass-Steagall and survive or not? Do you want to do this or not? And so you have this process going on of a fracturing of the power structure. Okay, that's how revolutions really work. Okay, a fracturing of the power structure, and then a part of the power structure then moves over to a different policy. A revolt from the population by itself does not occur. A change. Okay, the population shift against the power structure does not itself provide
A stable change.
a stable change. You gotta have
Ideology.
you have to have leadership.
There's leadership.
Okay, now this is very important. The Bolshevik Revolution did not occur just because some people rose up. There was a crack in the power structure. Because the Tsar had gone to war, and the Kerensky government continued the war, and Russia collapsed. And there was no agency that could come in that had a plan, except planning. And the LaRouche movement, in spite of its very small size, has a plan. And we're getting that plan out. And we're getting it we've been getting it out for quite a long time. And it's precisely that which people have to go to. But the people out there who are angry, that anger will not is not bad. It is potential, but it doesn't create a viable by itself. You need to shape it with a policy. Trump could turn that anger into creating a new enemy image, like Hitler did. You know, and Bernie Sanders could do the same thing if he is not careful. It could become like the French Revolution. Or you could have the Trump versus Sanders.
No, I don't think so. I think you'll find that
I think so too.
they come together.
I think they come together.
Yes.
I don't think they're going to be separate.
I think there's a possibility there.
Yeah, it might be very possible. But then the question is, what will Trump do and what would Sanders do? That's going to be our job. That's our job. Our job isn't to be cheerleaders for them. Our job is to provide the policy. Go ahead, what were you going to say, Ned? Sorry.
I'm just curious to know two things. If anybody's seen the 60 Minutes thing, because I haven't.
I have.
You have?
Mhm.
Is it the kind of thing that'll get people?
It's what started the ball rolling. The 60 Minutes interviewed Graham. It interviewed Porter Goss, former head of the FBI. It interviewed former Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Navy, Lehman.
Did you guys record it at all, or?
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
It's on
Okay,
YouTube.
it's on,
Yeah, you can go to YouTube.
Okay, because that's cool. I do have another question though.
Yeah.
I get an impression, and I could be wrong, but it seems like Bernie Sanders keeps revising his position depending on public or some forces. Like he's finally come out and spoken against these super delegates. Now he's in favor of the 28 pages being released.
He wasn't in favor of it
Oh, he
before.
wasn't?
No, but he was now.
He
So
is
is
now.
Hillary.
Yeah, so are American people becoming aware and getting pissed off, and he's having to
Well,
Rise.
so the superdelegates thing, I can't remember who started it, but I know Ben Swan, like they were starting to get some mainstream coverage. Now, a lot of, I saw a video that some Sanders supporters put together. And so they're,
Yeah.
you know, they're leftists and they're putting together this video to educate people on the superdelegates problem. And one of the people in the video says, well, why hasn't Bernie Sanders been talking about this? Why
Yeah.
don't we know about this? Very valid question.
Yeah.
And so I think there was pressure coming from his own activists and his own people saying, holy crap, what are you setting us up for here?
So this is still an internal thing, like within
What do you mean, an internal?
his own people, you said, so like,
Yeah, I think
Amongst-
but his own people are, public mainstream kind of.
Relations, you know, and trying to deal with this campaign, so I think they're saying, you
Okay.
gotta deal with it.
okay.
Yeah,
Either
And is that
you gotta come out on
The
the
same
side.
thing with the 28 pages, is people within are pressuring him to do that as well?
no, the 28 pages has got to come from a higher place. That's an institutional. You don't do that without knowing, like, considering all of the, you know, like Paul said, how afraid people are. Because, I mean, we've had meetings with other people in Washington before, and they've said, no, we can't do that because we need the Saudis. Didn't someone say that, we need the Saudis?
Yeah, the Saudi thing is very interesting because of the threat coming from Saudi Arabia to devastate the U.S. with attacking the U.S. Financially, economically. But that's exactly the Glass-Steagall moment. That's exactly the moment when you okay, you want to attack us, okay, we're going to wipe out all this worthless paper, you know, and so forth. But the Saudis are not running it themselves. The British are running the Saudis. So the British, I mean, when I mean running it, I don't mean influencing. I don't mean an influence. They are actually
Running it.
running it. The Saudis do not do anything without permission from the British or coordination with the British. They don't do anything.
Right,
That is the way it's been
right.
for 200 years. Go ahead.
That's an example of that. We have a member that comes quite often, Dr. Hussein.
Oh, yeah.
He works for the Saudis. He talked to the oil minister that was in charge of oil production in Saudi Arabia. And they were at coffee one day, and because he'd worked with him extensively for a year or two, and he was kind of got friendly with him. And phone call comes in, and he says, oh, I have to increase production. Well, you know, what do you mean you got to increase production? Oh, BP's phoned me, and basically
It was, but he could never get out from under the operations that they were running. And we were trying to set up a meeting at a very crucial point to have a situation where the Prime Minister of Russia, Primakov, would actually sit down with Clinton, either in Washington or in Kuala Lumpur at the APEC summit, to actually have a dialogue such that they could start to coordinate policy. And that didn't come off because either something came up and Clinton couldn't leave for Kuala Lumpur, or Primakov's plane was forced to go back because of the U.S. is starting to bomb and so forth in Yugoslavia. But anyhow, that's going off the track. So then we have the Bushes. There's a failure. You have the Bush crowd and 9/11. Okay. Now, LaRouche warned about 9/11 in January of 2001. He said a Reichstag fire is coming. They cannot run the operations they intend to run without crisis management structures. Okay. So then 9/11 comes. Okay, and then everything follows from that. Now, so on the John Stockwell show, on the day, as 9/11 was happening, LaRouche was saying that this could not have been done without support from within the U.S. government. He said that publicly. And then, eventually there were investigations into 9/11, and one of the principal people on the committee, Bob Graham, and they had a staff, and the staff was investigating, and the staff got massive blockage from the FBI. Nonetheless, two of the staffers managed to get enough hard evidence on the Saudis to put 28 pages in the 9/11 Commission report, and then what happened was it got suppressed. And so Bob Graham then wrote a novel, Keys to the Kingdom, which basically revealed what was in the 9/11.
Did you get one?
Welcome to the April 23rd BC LaRouche chapter meeting here in Vancouver. Tonight, our topic is, how do you take down the British Empire? That's our topic tonight. Okay. Kennedy was threatening the empire. You saw what happened to him. The entities that were involved in taking out Kennedy and beginning the process of reorientating the United States towards a support role for the empire involved a lot of the entities that are currently controlling U.S. policy and U.S. government. Now, Lyndon LaRouche emerges in the late 1970s as an organizer for a comprehensive shift away from the U.S. support for the British Empire and the group that he was organizing or was organizing on behalf of or with intended to come in with the Reagan administration in 1981. And Ronald Reagan was shot not long after his inauguration, and he was incapacitated to such a degree that he could not consolidate, or those people could not consolidate control over the policy, and the George Herbert Walker Bush crowd, the Bush family crowd, was able to neutralize and consolidate a lot more to the effect of essentially negating the efforts of those who were going to be running the country under Reagan, who were collaborating with and were using LaRouche as the international coordinator and organizing for bringing a lot of people in. Now the key to understanding is that in the late 70s, you still had a regulated banking system in the United States. You still had a regulated banking system, but you at the same time, in '78, you had the takeoff of the shadow banking system coming in to strip the US economy. So that was on the economic front. And a large part of the funds that were going offshore were funds that were connected to criminal activity like the drug trade. And so this is the empire coming back, not just to kill, but to actually possess economically. At the same time, you have the promotion of global free trade policies, which in turn were meant to dismantle the advanced sector nations and replace their production with very cheap slave labor type situations. So that was all going on in the 70s, at the late 70s. And the team that LaRouche was coming in, they were going to wage a war on the drugs. They were going to work out a deal with the Soviet Union to jointly develop the technologies to knock out missiles. Indira Gandhi was involved in the discussions with LaRouche as part of this. And she was assassinated not long after Reagan's inauguration. And the other person who was involved with LaRouche in discussions around this was the president of Mexico, Lopez Portillo. So, the net effect of this was that the Soviets rejected the cooperation with the US because the British had massively penetrated the networks that came to power after Chernenko died under Andropov. And so essentially you had a situation where by 1988, when Reagan term was up, you had LaRouche on his way to prison, you had George Bush on his way into the White House, and you had essentially a mess. And you had the Soviet Union breaking up because, for many reasons, related to this, and in the novel, and started to work to keep it going. Okay, and then we teamed up with him because we were already teamed up with all the people that were key people in the Kennedy investigation of the Kennedy assassination. People like William Garrison and Fletcher Prouty, those kind of people. We were actually working on cross-checking all of their facts and stuff like that, so that they wouldn't say something that would be stupid or something like that. And so we were working with those people. So then you had the Bush, and then you had Obama, but this 9/11, we kept this 9/11 thing going. And then you had the victims from New York who knew all about this, launched their lawsuit against the Saudi government. And that's been going on ever since as well. And they have not given up. This thing has been kept on simmering. And then a few years ago, we got a couple congressmen who were willing to fight, Walter Jones and a few others. And we were basically doing a lot of the legwork, organizing for this. And Bob Graham, and we've been having press conferences, and we've been regularly putting out. But before 9/11, in the year 2000, we issued a formal complaint to the State Department with all the evidence that the United Kingdom should be declared a state terrorist sponsoring state. And this is because the two major terrorist organizations that were very active, one was killing tourists in Egypt, and the other was was about to destroy Russia, the Chechens. They were all being run out of London. Now, so we were already mobilizing because we saw this thing becoming a major thing in the world, this international terrorist apparatus. We saw it emerging as a major in the 90s, and we were going after it. And LaRouche in 1999 did a video on it that was 3 hours long called Storm Over Asia. And you had a situation where it was a very dire situation. And under George Herbert Walker Bush, this empire took over, looted Russia, and then Clinton came in. And Clinton partly came in because of the break in the establishment that allowed him to come in. They used Ross Perot. And Clinton came in. And Clinton, the people who went to Clinton from the institution said, you gotta get LaRouche out of prison because he's needed to be organizing to mitigate and go against the policies that were under Bush, especially because of the respect that LaRouche has in the third world and in Russia. So in the early 90s, you have another effort trying to create itself under Clinton to break from the directionality that the British had set for the United States with the help of their internal operations and their external operations. And Clinton came under massive attack. The guy who ran the attack was Ambrose Evans Pritchard, who was a journalist who was based in Washington. He's now based in London. And he organized a massive assault on Clinton. And a lot of things happened. And this possibility that existed under Clinton as president never materialized. He never got out from under all the operations that were being run and all the games that were being run. And a lot of the operations were being run through Al Gore. A lot of the operations were being on Gore. So we were involved, LaRouche was involved in policy discussions with the Clinton administration, but his principal opponents inside the Clinton administration primarily were Al Gore, and secondarily was Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton did not share LaRouche's views per se, to the degree that Clinton, to a large degree, had some of LaRouche's views, because Clinton knew who the British were. He understood the British Empire. He understood what